จุนอาจงอาขุนอาหอยอาขิวอาเจงอาอัวอาฟัดเอกอาเฟยอาฝองอาฟูอาฟุอาฝุ่นอาฝวดอากิมอาจีอาจิบอากองอาปุย
这样的拿去了。已经睡好了已经。他晚上出来吧。晚上月亮出来穿什么衣服啊？黄衣服啊？啊？
淡黄的衣服出来了。
是淡黄的衣服。
Welcome everyone to this talk by Dr. Adeena Mey, who will also be in conversation with artist Hu Yun about his exhibition Mount Analogue, currently at the Rockbond Art Museum in Shanghai. My name is Jane Yuzu, Head of Programs and Research at the Rockbond Art Museum. And with my very great pleasure, I'll welcome and introduce Hu Yun. Shanghai-born artist Hu Yun is renowned for his profound insights into narratives, histories, and nuanced perceptions. Over the last decade, he has meticulously followed pivotal historical figures instrumental in disseminating knowledge concerning natural history and religion in Asia. These fields burgeoned globally during the 16th to 19th century amidst Western modernity and colonialism, profoundly influencing the exchange of goods, species, and people between Europe and its colonies. The routes traversed by capitalists, naturalists, and missionaries often intersected with colonial trade and naval expansion paths, with ports like Shanghai emerging as crucial nodes in this expansionist and capitalist milieu. It was within such a context that some of the earliest museums came into being in Shanghai. Hu Yun's first solo museum exhibition in China, Mount Analogue, marks both a mid-career retrospective and a site-responsive intervention. It is situated within the edifice presently housing the Rockbond Art Museum, which in 1933 served as the location for China's first natural history museum, the Royal Asiatic Society Museum. Mount Analogue intricately interlaces historical events, personal narratives, and natural elements aimed at interrogating historical accounts that oscillate between the visible and the invisible, stimulating introspection. The exhibition's title is a homage to an incomplete adventure novel by René Dumas, a 20th century French polymath. Dumas' narrative chronicles a group of adventurers questing for a mystical mountains accessible only through an elevated spiritual state. Evocative of the aftermath of a Big Bang, artworks from the past decade are deliberately fragmented and reconstituted, challenging linear historical narratives. The exhibition Mount Analogue embraces the fluidity of established histories, serving as a tribute to materials, imagery, voices, and texts that are fortuitously eluded processes of accumulation, classification, and categorization. Recognizing that historical understanding is inherently subjective, each perspective is deemed equally valid, debunking the notion of an objective historical truth. Huynh is currently based in Shanghai and Belgrade, Serbia. His other solo exhibitions include another diorama at NUS Museum in Singapore in 2019, Our Ancestors at Goethe Institute Open Space in Shanghai in 2012, Images of Nature at the Natural History Museum in London in 2010, among others. And with this, I also welcome Dr. Adeena Mey. Dr. Adeena Mey is a scholar, editor, and curator. His writing, editorial, and curatorial projects explore artists' moving image, exhibition studies, contemporary art in East and Southeast Asia, cybernetics, decolonial and cosmotechnical thought. As principal investigator of the digital research project, Black Atlantic Museum at Paul Mellon Center between 2021 to 2022, and co-initiator of the workshop series, Writing and Publishing Art in Southeast Asia at British Academy in 2021, 2023, and 2024. He has been exploring sustainable infrastructures for new modes of writing, publishing, and thinking about contemporary art based on non-Western epistemologies and thoughts. He is co-editor of Exhibiting the Moving Image, History Revisited, and Cinema in the Expanded Field. And curatorial projects include A Viewing Room at KCC UK in London in 2021, Film Implosion at Medra for Contemporary Art in Cairo in 2018, Neogeography 1 and 2 and Centre d'Art-Neuchâtel at Switzerland, and Post Territory Ujunguk in Seoul in 2017. He is an editor at After All Journal and a research fellow at After All Research Centre, Centre St Martin's, University of the Arts London, and a visiting lecturer at HED, Geneva University of Art and Design in Switzerland. Adeena will be giving a talk, followed by a conversation with Huynh. As this is a recorded event, I hope you will understand that there will be no Q&A. Thank you, Huynh. Thank you, Adeena. We look forward to your talk and exchange.
Hi, everyone. And thank you so much, Joni and Huynh. That was a truly wonderful introduction, Joni, and I must say that you set most of the parameters and the kind of basis for what I'm about to present. My talk is in three parts. Part one is on Hollow Man and exhibition history. Part two on the question of naming in Huyhn's practice. And the third tries to reflect on the kind of criticality at work in the practice in relationship to the exhibitionary context. But without further ado, I'll jump into the presentation. So one, Hollow Man and exhibition history. So I've gleaned the images on this first slide from Huyhn's exhibition guidebook. On the left is a model of his site-specific intervention, Hollow Man. Made of black elastic mesh, Hollow Man seems to erupt out of the museum's floor, stretching and expanding up towards the upper floor. In its upwards movement, it branches out in multiple directions. But as regards its basis, it remains firmly rooted. Here, we are reminded of Brazilian artist Helio Oiticica's take on the redefinition of the environmental, leading to his proposition, I quote, of a meta-sculpture or a new perception going from the sculptural to a sort of art simultaneously situated on the ground and in the air. Hollow Man is a gesture of reconfiguring space, one that cuts across floors and exploits the building's vertical possibilities, an almost literal staging of the deterritorializing forces of smooth space against striated space, the soft, transparent, organic, and black mesh structures producing a spatial otherness amidst the solid, linear white walls of Rugburn's architecture. But it is also an act of excavation, whereby signaling space serves to uncover histories of architectural and institutional changes and process of adaptation and readjustments. Hollow Man is citational with regards to the museum's history and architecture, shifting our attention to the genius loci of the building and acting as museological palimpsest. Indeed, as one can see on the right-hand photograph before, what anchors the Hollow Man are the remaining bases of former exhibition cabinet. Initially a library serving the increasing needs for intellectual activities and leisure of Shanghai's growing foreign population, at the time mostly British and American merchants, missionaries, and a few medical practitioners, becoming in 1858 the Shanghai Literary and Scientific Society, it was, as the former president of the Royal Asiatic Society from 2007 to 2011, Peter Hibbert, puts it, during that period of almost universal commotion in China, that this society, the Royal Asiatic Society, was founded, with the peaceful design of conducting useful research into the history, the industry, the philosophy, the literature, the language, and the manners of the Chinese people. We were determined to understand both their religion and their want of religion. We wish to know what makes the Chinese hate us and how far they love us. Here, the collusion of an impulse for knowledge and colonial reason are evident, but still restrict themselves to the human sciences. However, this drive to increase foreign understanding of China would soon expand, and Hibbert continues, the Royal Asiatic Society would call for a move to, I quote, popularize lectures focusing on all aspects of life in China, as well as its geology, botany, and natural history. And as a matter of fact, the first exhibits at the Royal Asiatic Society featured a collection of ducks, I quote, just about all the obtainable ducks in the Shanghai district. Furthermore, the archival picture featured in the exhibition guidebook shows vitrines lined next to one another. Most vitrines contain one animal, some two, probably male and female, of a particular species. They are enclosed in front of either neutral backgrounds or partial window dressing of their natural habitats. On the upper part, one can see an ostrich, two kinds of mountain goats, and a peacock. Here, the Royal Asiatic Society Museum seemed to have taken part in the trend of 19th century natural history museums, which consisted of packed galleries attempting to showcase as many specimens as possible. The Royal Asiatic Society thus performed a particular kind of knowledge production through classification and display, producing a particular type of epistemology. Consequently, one might ask what the nature of Hu Yun's Hollow Man and his interventions at Rugbun Art Museum more broadly are. How does his work operate within its context of exhibition? Does it perform some sort of non or anti or para-epistemology, for instance? To sketch some possible answers, a brief excursus through the intersected histories of epistemology and museums is necessary. More specifically, it is on French philosopher of science and epistemologist François Dagogne's definition of epistemology that I wish to focus here. Less known than other French thinkers, nonetheless, according to Bruno Latour, Dagonet belongs to a hidden tradition of French philosophy that includes Henry Bergson and Gilbert Simondon. Henry Bergson and Gilbert Simondon, whose ingenuity, I quote Latour, was able to see the mind within matter. Moreover, as a disciple of seminal philosophers of science Gaston Bachelard and Georges Canguilhem, along with Simondon, whose work has famously been revised in our contemporary moment by Hugh Hui and Bernard Stiegler, Dagonet is credited for having reactualized Bachelard's, I quote, precise description and careful analysis of the material aspects of science, as well as ushering an interest in the concrete aspects of machines and technology. And indeed, a medical doctor, a philosopher, and an author having also written extensively on contemporary art, his thought is most relevant, especially his study of the birth of museums and their role in the development of the discipline of epistemology. In a collection of essays entitled Les outils de la réflexion, épistémologie, in English, The Tools of Thought, Epistemology, Dagonet sketched some of the parameters of what he calls the epistemological field and the mutual constitution between the various schools of philosophy of science and the dynamics of specific intellectual endeavors that concretize into scientific discoveries. In this regard, Dagonet's epistemology lies on the principle of relation and genesis, each problem calling in every instance for, I quote, the reinvention of the neologic of invention. Dagonet further notes that, I quote, and you can see on the slide, the epistemologist must set to work, going back to the very problem itself, to the apparatuses, primary documents, sketches, debates, and controversies of a specific time, and to the milieu, in order to sort things out. Moreover, closer to our present concern, writing on the invention of the museum and of collections of natural history, Dagonet has shown that the foundation of the museum enabled the birth of what he calls an institutional epistemology, co-constituted by the advent of new biological theories. This epistemology, enabled by the museum and embodied in it, aims less at the accumulation or gathering of beings than their comparison and partition, operating as I quote, an associationist combinatrix. We accumulated so many beings that one had to find a method to identify each of them, Dagonet writes. The Natural History Museum is a refuge collection where similarities are redoubled and therefore reinforced. Through the practice of collecting, the accumulation of similarities reveal the essence of the object. Nomination, classification, categorization. Museum knowledge is produced through these acts, which enable natural phenomena to be translated into a language as best as its limitations allow. Classification and categorization then divide up reality into concepts, predicates, conditions, and necessities for the production of knowledge. They include or exclude and thereby create spaces within their own temporality. To be included, a phenomenon must be identifiable and therefore named. Part 2, naming. And back to Huyun. With regards to the museum institutional epistemology and its underlying logics of naming, classifying, and categorizing, Huyun invites the viewer to look sideways, and much of his works concerns names or the act of naming. If naming both describes and produces a reality, what of the phenomena that exist but remain unnamed, whose mode of existence escapes conventional understandings, or whose status is simply ambiguous? What about the gaps between a name and a thing, real or imagined? The way Huyun's work cut across habitual categories can already be read in the exhibition's title, Mount Analogue, from René Daumal's eponymous novel. Daumal's narrative begins with the protagonist visiting someone named Pierre Sogol, Sogol being the anagram of logos, the Greek term for thought or reason, a character symbolizing pure light, and whose Parisian home is accessible only by climbing its facade. The story progresses to the assembly and departure of an expedition aiming to climb Mount Analogue, whose location the heroes determine by considering it's hidden by the curvature of space. What starts as a classic adventure tale gradually transforms, evoking the idea of the mountain as an impossible link between earth and heaven, and an unknown path where the soul ascends. Alpinism evolves from a hiking project into a means of transcending, pushing forward, despite the temptations of ease faced by Domel's explorers, or the challenges posed by an indigenous society governed by mountaineers, depicted as ecologically aware, rejecting engines, and punishing those who mistreat nature. Domel also introduces the definition of mountaineering. Mountaineering is the art of traversing mountains by facing the greatest dangers with the utmost prudence. Here, art is the accomplishment of knowledge in action. One conclusion drawn from Mount Analogue is that if its base is accessible, its summit is beyond human reach and provides a scale of the infinite, an exploration of the limits of the possible and the impossible that has become the program of Huyun's practice. The first example occurs upon entering the museum space as one encounters what might be the first work in the exhibition, although it's not linear. The first work in the exhibition, The Unknown Clouds. In The Unknown Clouds, the artist was working out of Australia, conducting research on Chinese-Australian migration, which eventually led him to look at the history of mining, around which a large part of historical exchanges between the two countries revolve. As part of his inquiry into Chinese laborers, Huyun encountered the Golden Dragon Museum in the city of Bendigo, a museum established to help rectify the overlooked role by public institutions in Australia of the contributions of Chinese immigrants during the gold rushes and in Australia's immigration history more broadly. There, the artist found a register with the names of the Chinese laborers listed in alphabetic order. An oddity of this registry is the anglicization of their names, looking like nicknames, resulting from irregular transliterations of dialects and other variations on the script. The list bears the paradox of recording the trace of these workers, yet without being able to help identifying them. The Unknown Clouds is composed of 376 rice grains on which the workers' names have been carved, filling half a Qing Dynasty teacup found on the mining site, decorated with the so-called seaweed pattern and mounted onto one of the gallery's walls. By undoing the alphabetic order of the Australian registry, they have been taken out of the administrative logic which contained them. Rewritten onto rice grains, one of the few things laborers could carry with them, the Unknown Clouds reestablishes a sense of intimacy lost to the administrative transliteration process. Now liberated and rearranged, these names exist somewhere between a form of resistance to oblivion and the remaining impossibility to be identified. Unregistered 2024 also results from Huyun's research in Australia and around Victorian mining sites. Consisting of color filters stuck onto a window and a series of 18 colored squares in matching plexiglass frames, Unregisters brings together his research into Chinese migration with his interest in natural history. Indeed, Huyun discovered the existence of plants growing around the mines, generically called superplants by scientists. Also called hyperaccumulators, these plants can be used in the process of phytorehabilitation, namely that which uses plants to extract minerals including zinc, nickel, cadmium, cobalt, selenium, and manganese. In collaboration with the Sustainable Minerals Institute at the University of Queensland, Huyun developed special pigments to portray, so to say, these plants, some of which are nameless. To some extent, the phenomena of superplants used by Huyun is reminiscent of Nelson Goodman's new riddle of induction. In his book, Fact, Fiction, and Forecast, originally published in 1954, the analytic philosopher coined the term GRU, combining green and blue, a predicate that applies to objects examined before a certain time if they are green, but to other objects if they are blue. With GRU, Goodman was able to designate the color referring to the intermediate condition of an emerald in its process of transformation. In a book, philosopher of science Ian Hacking devoted to Goodman's riddle of induction, Hacking makes a reference to flowers that currently exist only in the state of their preservation in botanical museums. Hacking writes, they are so rare that they have no name. While formally looking like abstract paintings, as curator Ruben Kehan has noted, materially and thematically, Hu Yun brings the historical experience of Chinese workers whose names were recorded so inconsistently, together with a technology that promises a possible future, inviting a range of ethical questions. Just so much information and hidden stories, Hu Yun reflects. Who are these names? Who were they really? It reminds me of those plants. Who are these plants? Do we really know them? Do we really care? In The Secret Garden, Hu Yun reflects on the origins of natural history museums, focusing on colonial activities in China by amateur naturalists like John Reeves. Reeves, a tea inspector for the East India Company, named after himself and introduced the Reeves pheasant to Europe. During his time in Canton from 1812 to 1831, he commissioned Chinese artisans to illustrate animals and plants, contributing to European science. Hu Yun's installation, conceived in 2010 during a residency at Gasworks in London, explores this history. It features watercolor, drawings of the pheasant's tail feather, a table with Reeves' archive, a copper plate showing the distance between the UK and China, and a wooden crate representing a chest used for opium smuggling, displaying a video of a Chinese opera play. And I now move to my third part, trying to reflect on the potential for decolonial institutional critique. As it's been noted, the Secret Garden is representative of Hu Yun's signature editing and re-editing of archives. In the case of the Secret Garden, the material is a prime example of colonial archives, while in other works, Hu Yun engages with stories of migration, cognate or indexed to their wider colonial context. In this regard, to the extent that it is part of a larger curatorial program at Rockburn Art Museum, China Journal, which draws its title from the 1923 Shanghai-based Science and Arts Journal of naturalist Arthur de Carl Sowerby and sinologist John Calvin Ferguson, and focuses on the legacy of the Royal Asiatic Society, of which they were members. This program, which looks at the history of Rockburn Art Museum's building and institutional history, it seems apt to look at the kind of critique Hu Yun's Mount Analogue unfolds. And to do so, I would like to bring Hu Yun's into a dialogue with the work of two other artists, namely Thai artist Prachaya Pintong and pioneer of Black British art, Keith Piper. So this is an image of a work from 2013 called Broken Hill by Pintong. A replica, Pintong's work engages with the origins of humanity and its mediation through history, storytelling. For his solo exhibition at Chisenhale Gallery in London in 2013, Thai artist Prachaya Pintong exhibited an exact copy of the Broken Hill skull, the first human fossil found in Africa. Aged at an estimated 299,000 years, the skull was discovered in Zambia in 1921 and is a remnant of a male Homo heidelbergensis, a species from 700,000 years to 150,000 years ago, believed to be the last common ancestor of our species, a Homo sapiens, evolving in Africa, and Homo neanderthalensis, the Neanderthals, which evolved in Eurasia. Taken the same year by the mining company who had been excavating that site to the Natural History Museum in London, the skull has since 2015 been permanently exhibited in the institution's Human Evolution Gallery. Moreover, it is considered a highly significant piece in furthering the understanding of human evolution. Close to when Prachaya Pintong conducted research for Documenta 13 around flies in Africa that provoked sleeping sickness, his friend, the filmmaker Chakrawal Nilthamrong, told him about the peculiar object held at the Lusaka National Museum that appeared to be a replica. This reproduction is on view as part of the permanent archaeology collection. The museum's website presents it as one of the most fascinating exhibits. Addressing art's function as a mediator for the voice of others through artifacts often remained or displaced, Pintong's specific interest in the Broken Hill skull was in its being revealed as a fake by the museum's guide, which nevertheless enabled a certain narration of history, in particular, the importance of discoveries made in Zambia. At Chisenhale, Pintong exhibited the replica in exchange for a similar artifact found on the internet, while in the Lusaka National Museum, museum guide Kamfwa Chisala gave tours and explained the complex history of the skull and how it had informed the many interpretations of the development of the Homo heidelbergensis and Homo sapiens. A strange coincidence, at the time of his show at Chisenhale, not only could Pintong see the original skull for the first time, but it was also the first instance of the objects being put on public display of the two Broken Hill skulls existing in the same city. And as Pintong notes, both came from the same place. In a 2013 article, archaeologist Francie B. Musonda exposed detailed evidence of the circumstances and colonial mechanics in which the skull was supposed, so to say, donated to the Natural History Museum, triggering what has since then been a movement advocating for its repatriation to Zambia. The skull is at the crossroads, its future being potentially its place of origin, and the study of our origins based on the Broken Hill skull will likely be carried over from Zambia rather than London. But as for the replica, however, there seems to be no plan. So this is an image of another installation by another artist, Lost Vitrines, by Keith Piper. 2007 in the UK marked the commemoration of the abolition of the 1807 Slave Trade Act. As part of the Wealth of Initiative to commemorate this event, the Victoria and Albert Museum in London hosted Uncomfortable Truth, the shadow of slave trading on contemporary art and design, curated by Zoe Whitley, now the director of Chisenhale. In fact, this represented the contemporary side of the V&A's larger project for the bicentenary, with Whitley's show being paralleled with another show called Traces of the Trade, Discovery Trails, exploring the links between art, design, and the transatlantic slave trade. Exploring links between art, design, and the transatlantic slave trade, which through 5 trails across the museum's galleries sought to address how art and design were linked to the transatlantic slave trade, highlighting how objects in its collection recalled, I quote, the legacies of the slave trade that remain in Britain today and how it continued to shape our society. It is within this epochal, national, and institutional frame that Uncomfortable Truth took shape and must be understood, and with it that it negotiated curatorially its take on the history, aesthetics, and politics of the transatlantic trade. It presented works by 11 artists from the 3 continents of the Atlantic world and from diverse generations: Ella Anatsui, Anissa Jane, Michael Paul Brito, Tafuma Gutsa, Romuald Hazume, Lubaina Himid, Christine Meisner, Keith Piper, Inka Shonibare, Julian Sinzogan, and Fred Wilson. Keith Piper's Lost Vitrines from 2007 were exhibited in a room of the British galleries dedicated to the 18th century, galleries dedicated to the 18th century. Based on conversations with Victor and Albert conservators and thorough research on the museological and display conventions of these galleries, Piper produced books and artifacts replicating the style and language of those usually exhibited there, but with content and imagery exposing the violence of slavery. Composing Lost Vitrines were, for instance, pages illustrating a gentleman's guides to the restraint of Negroes, which you can see on the left, or a box containing a color palette titled "The Colored's Codex: An Overseer's Guide to Comparative Complexion." Plainly or humorously dark, Piper's strategies of détournement were intended, in his own words, to, I quote, "open a dialogue around systems of encoding the memory of a historical epoch within the established archive and the extent to which alternative and counter-narratives of an epoch can be strategically absented." To conclude, and to open up to the questions of the criticality of Huyun's work in dialogue with Prachea Pintong's and Keith Piper's, I would like to cite the following anecdote. At the end of a recent conference, Senegalese philosopher and Columbia professor Souleymane Bachir Diagne gave about the much debated question of object restitution, a member of the audience made the following comment. "You seem to be retreating from more radical proposals, but I note that you haven't addressed the relevance of the museum itself, criticized as much in the West as in Africa," and we could add Asia, of course. "Some proponents of post-colonial and decolonial thinking believe that the museum, imported into non-Western context, is a trace of colonization, and therefore that it shouldn't simply be used or shouldn't exist anymore." But Souleymane Bachir Diagne distinguishes two types of radicalisms: a radicality that aims to change the state of the world, not a radicality that says that colonialism stands alone and is our only agent, a colonialism that has become a kind of ghost that has already invented everything and said everything. And so to say that objects have become universal because they are in a universal place is absurd. In contrast, what Diagne calls the mutant nature of African objects, but I think we can expand that to contemporary art objects, such as Huyun's. The nature of the mutant nature of objects is that they express movement and rhythm. Diagne says, these objects, by their very creation, don't stay in place, just as a child doesn't stay in place. In this regard, one could say that Huyun's Mount Analogue is made of such mutant objects that, in theorist Catherine McCrittick's words, produce spatial acts, namely the inextricable combination of real imagined geographies generated to argue that the poetics of landscape, whether expressed through theoretical, fictional, poetic, musical, or dramatic text, can also be understood as real responses to real, read colonial, spatial inequalities. Thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you, Adeena. Really interesting presentation. And it's also interesting to see your really, how to describe it, like a diverse perspective to look through this perspective back to my works. So it's really interesting. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your kind feedback. I'm really happy. But I must say that for me, I mean, it's your work itself that invites me, to engage with this wealth of genealogies and materials coming from fiction, the history of science, art history, contemporary art. But the first, and I think that yourself, you engage, with a very trans or multidisciplinary inquiry. And I think it's a work that lends itself. I mean, it creates really generative conversations, for people like me. And in a way, I think it's one of the most cogent examples of what's called artistic research, and actually how certain methodologies that can be shared with researchers actually can be expanded and become more poetic, but most importantly, find a material form. But although I've said a lot of things, there's also a lot of things I haven't said, as you're well aware. And I think one of the first thing, which actually should be obvious because it's related to the reference to René Daumal and the title of the exhibition, Mount Analogue, but actually that goes beyond. I think it's an element or feature of your work that is perhaps at the basis of some of your drives and impulse to engage with certain materials. But it's the figure of the explorer, the figure of the adventurer, so which is something that to some extent you embody yourself, but it is also, but there are also figures that seem to attract your attention and sort of be at the origin of some of your projects. So yeah, I don't know if you could say a few words about the figure of the explorer or the adventurer and the likes.
No, I totally agree. As you described, especially when I was reading like those figure stories or their adventures, different explorations. I guess as many people will share the same feeling when you read like any kinds of novel or exploration stories, like you imagine yourself there. So the more you read it, the more you actually put yourself within that context and to curious about what will happen next and what's the what will happen, like it's kind of like a time traveling, or like you're bringing you to different moment. So yeah, exactly as you just described. And another, I think, very important thing which interests me the most, I guess also I think you have described it in different ways during your presentation. I like this towards the end you mentioned this object as the movement and the rhythm of the object. It's really something interested me the most, and also I'm trying to kind of work with all the time, which is also like this kind of a fluidity among all these figures, objects, or sometimes they also mix with each other. So I think fluidity is always something I most interested in. And also I would say like also I'm kind of against this word of research as for myself as an artist. I would rather call it like to try to catch a ride with the fluidity. Like, of course, I cannot, like always follow it. I will get lost easily. So, but get lost sometimes also bring me to other directions, or maybe I'm going just circling. It's also possible. So yeah, but I'm kind of try to work with this feeling in most of the time. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Well, I might, in my presentation, I might have given the impression that that you engage with some kind of big inquiries into natural history museums, and kind of this very and you work very site specifically. I think your work engages with a wealth of material that you encounter when you invite to produce works in particular places. But in fact, there's also a whole personal dimension in your approach. There's a work I haven't talked about, which has as its starting point your grandfather, that you have connected with another, with Jan Vo, and the work that also refers to his family history. So I would like to ask you about the relationship between what you search for, and the kind of connection between family, the personal family history, and the wider world.
Yeah, this is also a question I always ask myself, actually, and also, but I mean, most of the time, actually, I feel like I'm not searching for anything. On the opposite, like a lot of things appear who kind of guiding me to different field, different topics, or to different very specific person. So yeah, so back to like at the beginning, I mentioned these like a catcher, right? So it's more like I don't know what's waiting there for me, or I don't have really a clear goal, like what I'm looking for. So I think a lot of things appear also like together with the life, I would say. Like, for example, like actually how I started kind of got interested and then start to borrow things from my grandfather when he was still alive. It happened really, like I didn't plan for it. I just, at one point I moved to a place which near his place, so I spent some time during the day just to visit him and had chat. And I didn't know most of his life, actually. He's not that kind of person really interested in talking about his life. But like as we start to see each other very frequently, and then we started chatting, and then he started to telling me different stories, but not really prepared for like a proper interview or whatever. Like it's just more like a casual chat. So I started to realize how interesting his life is. And then from time to time, he also, bring out something to show me, to accompany his story. So, like, and then I got this idea, why not I start to kind of like to look back at his life, and then to but because at the same time I was also reading and doing other things, and then like this kind of connection happened by itself. So yeah, so that's how these kind of encounters happened, and end up, or like I borrowed them and to kind of temporarily put them together in my work. It's also for like a temporary state. It's not like I don't give any like conclusion, or I don't want to give any like like comment. I just simply sometimes put things together and to see what will come out from this combination. Yeah.
And so that kind of leads me to a question I have, because the materialization of your works, I mean, it unfolds in very different ways. So yeah, what's the kind of the approach to materials? I mean, you kind of partly already answered that it comes to you, and this reminds me, of the term serendipity, which comes from a tale about a prince from Ceylon, from Sri Lanka, the Prince of Serendip, who basically it is the story of this prince who keeps finding things without having looked for them, and he keeps making this kind of important discoveries. So there's a bit of that serendipitous process, perhaps. But how does that lead to choosing to work with particular materials and objects, and how do you decide to either produce or reassemble pre-existing objects, if that makes sense?
Yeah, it's as you know, like I mentioned, like I never most of the time I don't search for certain things. I don't have a clear goal. So which means like things when things happened, when I started learning about something, and then like these kind of material sometimes appeared in front of me. For example, like this rice grind, which I used in this installation, is simply I read about those gold miners who came to Australia, like what they carry with them. Simply like they carry some rice as the food, and they carry this I don't know the English word, the bamboo stick, which they put on the shoulder to carry things. That's it. So like then I got interested in this rice, because when I started to look at a handful of rice, and then each of them are quite different actually. None of those two grinds are the same. So it's like then I think why not to do something with this, and then like I start to think that looking for those masters who can carve on a small surface. And then I met this really interesting guy who's from China, and he's a master of micro carving. And then I talked with him about this idea to do something with the rice, and like he told me for him rice is one of the biggest object. He has no problem doing that, and it's very easy job. And then he even like he suggests me what kind of rice we should use. It's actually not me bringing him the material, and because he's a master and he knows like if you use the rice from the North China, which is very common, but the rice is too hard because it's too dry and it will crack very easily. And also you cannot use the rice from South, like a Vietnamese or Thai rice, because they're too soft in a way, they're too powdery. And then he suggests this very specific type of rice, which produced in the Canton region, which exactly was those gold miners came from. That's their hometown, produce. So, all these things connected by itself, I'm the one who just, like to present it in a way. So, yeah, and which I'm really enjoy doing this kind of work. I think me, I would think I'm not really, like the one who create all these. I'm the one who maybe connect it, or to bring it out at a certain point. Yeah, so that's how, maybe one example, like how I chose material, or in a way like how material appeared at certain moment by themselves. And yeah.
And in a way, now we're at a point where this logic has reverted. It is Rockburn Art Museum that has found you, to be included in a program that looks at the history, but you've been working on the history of the Royal Asiatic Society way before this program was conceived. So it is kind of also, shifting your position somehow.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
what kind of reflection can you have on that?
Yeah, I guess it's actually, I mean, the collaboration with Rockband can trace back actually 12 years ago. I had my actually artist talk first time in 2011. At that time, there was just this really amazing public program called Nightlife, I remember. So at that time, I just finished my residency in Gasworks and Natural History Museum. I finished that project, and then Rockban invited me, why not to give a talk about what you did. And then, you know, like I think at that moment, like I start to, because I was back to Shanghai, and then I start to, you know, got interested in looking into the history of museums in general, and of course the Natural History Museum and the history of Rockban, the previous host of the building, RES. And then, you know, that's how everything started, I would say. And then, you know, during all these times, I didn't really, you know, doing any like specific research about the history of Rockban, but you know, many of my other projects kind of all can somehow connect it to this part of, because you know, like in general, I'm interested in the history of museums in China, and it includes, you know, these actually quite small group of people who like mostly foreigners who came to China in different times for different reasons, but somehow, you know, like each of them has part of their life related to this topic. So yeah, so I would say like this kind of ongoing collaboration actually never stopped until this moment. Like the museum invited me, why not to do a proper exhibition? I think, yeah, that's really, that's the moment, I think, to really work together to see like how to kind of, also it's also a challenge and also very interesting challenge for myself, like it's my first time to see actually most of the works has been exhibited together in one space, which is also very rare for me. So yeah, so that's, I think it's an interesting moment to do this exhibition also.
And obviously, you know, working on that kind of survey of your own work, well, you had to make a selection and somehow apply some of the museum methodologies and conventions to your own work. You had to select, include, create associations between existing works, newly commissioned works, and some of the works that have that connects to other works are just by themselves without the works with which they are connected. For instance, like when I was preparing for this talk, I saw that as part of APT, and I quoted Ruben Keehan, who wrote a short text about your project in Australia, the research on the pigments produced from the super plants also led to other kinds of so kind of a drawing installation. So this was excluded. So how did you kind of negotiate your own well, how did you curate your own work, and how did that work, you know, in conversation with the curators, with ex-Ju Noel? And
yeah, actually, yes, it's not actually how to put it, like yes, the preparation of, I mean, the thinking of how to make the selection is took us a while, and also I think for me it's I would see like this exhibition as a whole, I would say a work, instead of, you know, like to put all these works together. I mean, for me, it's also maybe the way I work. Like a lot of my works will kind of will be transformed again and again in a way, like they appear or reappear in my future projects. I think that's also how I work, and because every time when they reappear, they will kind of been transformed into a new form, or because I always want to, you know, like to readjust them in order to fit into a new context. So for this exhibition, I think that's why I say for me, it's more like I'm making one work for the Rockburn Art Museum space. So in a way, like a lot of previous works, I see them as a kind of, again, like a raw materials, to kind of recycle them or upcycle them. I don't know, like to kind of, yeah, in a way to transform them again in order to be together with all the other works, and to create this big image, or big reality. So yeah, so I think that's, I think the basic idea I had while preparing this exhibition. So, and also like in terms of space, I see I think it's the first time like for Rockburn Museum to use all the spaces, which means like not only the exhibition space, but also including, you know, those in between spaces, like while you open my show actually literally started from when you open the lift open, and then the show start. So the first work, actually the rice grind, is not even in the exhibition space. It's actually outside. And also I'm using the staircase, because usually for keeping for the safety staircase. So it's not a proper exhibition space, but for this exhibition, I want really to, you know, reactivate all these corners and in between spaces, as to make it as a one reality, I would say. Yes.
Connecting to my last comment, and the reference to Catherine McKittrick at the end, I think the uncomfortable truth exhibition in 2007 at the V&A was also mostly unfolding outside of the gallery spaces, and it was criticized at the time because of that. But in my reading of it, that's where the kind of you know, critical potential lies, and you know, in kind of articulating different spatial politics through that exhibition. But in relation to the mutable and the possibility of readjusting or adapting your works, this reminds me of something that happened across different editions of Mount Analogue. I don't know if that's the case in English, but as you know, the novel wasn't finished since René Daumal died, passed away at quite early age. So in early editions, at least in French, the book was ending with a full stop. But in more recent editions, the book ends with a comma. And I think, you know, that changes the entire nature of the work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, from a finished work, something that has been enclosed simply by a full stop, replacing the full stop with a comma reopens everything, and sort of opens the work to multiple future paths and many lives to come. So in a sense, I guess that is something that might have been attractive to you as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes, of course. Like it's also like I had this feeling while reading the book. I read it, you know, like not in one time. Like it's I always go back to one chapter, or then maybe again the chapter before. I think that by doing this, it's really interesting for me. Of course, we know it's unfinished work, but for me, you know, like it can be finished at any moment, in a way, and that's the thing I appreciate the most, actually, of this piece of, you know, really fantastic work. So I think it's also something I wanted to, you know, like try with my practice is like to provide as many as entrance or exits as possible, to also, you know, a kind of to a little bit against this lineage way of telling the things. And yeah, I would always call them like a lot of leaking spots in a way on in a glass jar, if you have imagine it. So maybe it's empty, but there was something inside, or they were just, you know, like coming out from different cracks, or yeah. So this is something I always keep in mind, like while doing my work.
Yeah, I think the first time we met, we talked about this notion of gaps, and you mentioned cracks, and indeed, you know, a lot of the work unfold in between or interstitial spaces of the museum, and maybe that also yeah, we could say that that the work also consists in, you know, you know, maybe these gaps or undefined spaces come to you, and the work kind of, you know, consists in finding ways to inhabit them, but also find new cracks, exacerbate, you know, gaps, and I think it is a work that is driven by certain logic, even if it's, you know, if you don't want to call it research, but there's a logic that goes against wholeness, totalities, the fact that things could be captured as one, and, you know, you kind of emphasize a form of displaced nature of things, a form of scatteredness, but at the same time, it's very rigorous, all that.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think there's a rigor in finding the title Mount Analogue, which looks like a perfect kind of conceptual framework for the whole exhibition, and the kind of movement between, I mean, it is a gap itself between, you know, the actual basis and a kind of a mountaintop which is speculated on. And as we can see, and hopefully as I hope I've rendered justice to, this is also happening in all of your works. So I mean, there's, you know, I'm tempted to say that the work performs or enacts a kind of poetics of the gap, a poetics of the interstice, a poetic of the crack, something like that, which is of course has a political dimension. It's a very, I think, emancipatory sort of spirit and ethos. Yeah, I don't know if you want to react to that.
No, I totally agree, and so I just want to say, like, you know, like through these gaps or cracks, that's how things connected. That's how we are connected, actually. Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's actually what I like the most in a way.
I mean, because I think a lot of the work is it looks like it looks at history, but actually I think it's very open to it has a futurity in the fact that the works can be adapted, adjusted, reworked, etc. And so actually it's very future oriented. But although you're not actively looking for things, you know, things find you. I still want to ask you whether you know which museum is going to come and get in touch with you. Are you able to speculate on that? There are infinite possibilities.
Not really, but no, as you just mentioned, like it is like when I was like thinking, you know, like prepared the exhibition, or like at the very beginning, like I was the question I ask myself the most is like, because the exhibition is going to, I mean, it happened in the art museum, but which is a very rare case in China, because that's I would say the only building which was actually built for a museum in the early times, like early 20th century, and it still is being used as a museum, art museum. So which is very rare, and so that's why I had this question in my mind all the time, is like what today this museum going to do, or like what it's going to do in the future, like what I'm going to do with the exhibition, in a way like I want very much to bring out this question, like what the museum can do today or tomorrow in the future. So that's why I think the whole exhibition is actually I really want to talk about like this topic of museum, like the way, or let's say like the way we try to recognize the outside world, or we try to structure, we try to kind of learn about all the world outside of us. So I think this exhibition is very much to question this in a way, to question because also like like museum, this idea, this concept in China is also quite interesting, because it's not something like came out by the society itself. It's something has been brought in, and then we just adopt it, and then it became like such we had these museum booms in China in the past, I don't know, 20 30 years. Like there's so many museums all of a sudden opened, and a lot of things we are having them, but without really questioning or knowing why we're doing this, and why we this thing in this way, why we have these objects in the cabinet. So I think somehow also it's also interesting, because these kind of, I mean, the a lot of audience might not have the same perspective where the audience from the West world had. So, but it's also makes it very interesting, like because they're very much look at the same thing. They're looking at the same language. They're reading the same language of interpreting the world. But I think this exhibition is somehow, I want to, like in the context of China, like the museum, what museum could be, or what's the other possibilities in a way for art museum. Yes, it's also like the main question I had in my mind actually while doing the exhibition. Mm-hmm.
I'm really excited to follow your future projects, and I'm really thankful to Joni and X and you, because yeah, I kind of, this allowed me to immerse myself in your work, and yeah, it's giving me a lot of food for thought. So yeah, I really look forward to your upcoming projects.
Thank you, Adeena.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
Thank you both so much. Thank you, Adeena, for sharing such a well-structured insights into Hui's practice, the exhibition, and setting up the context of the epistemological field, and problematizing museum practices, and situating it with Hui's artistic strategies that, as we've seen in the exhibition, and also setting up Hui's practice in dialogue with other artists, Keith Piper and Pingtong. And thank you, Huiyun and Adeena, for this conversation. So much things has surfaced. One thing that I note down with your conversation is that not two grains are the same, and also not works are the same when shown twice. And I think this is a true collaboration, between Huiyun, between the curator X, and between the museum. But also this conversation is a true collaboration. Now we are really looking at all the things that is fluidity. We're looking at leaking. We're looking at gaps and cracks in between, and we're really hoping for things to be continuously connected. in new cracks. And also, I think what you did so tremendously in this conversation is that you were both renaming methodologies, and I thought that was so interesting. We're giving new names to the ways of doing things, and thank you both so much for this. And the last question that Huyun was asking, what museum can do today? And I think that's a really broad and really big questions for the field, for the ecology, and for all of us. And as the Rockmont Art Museum is currently embarking on this research phase, but also all of the exhibitions and programs are really looking at the notion of complex geographies, and specifically starting from our locale, which is Shanghai and China. And with Huyin's exhibition, we are revisiting our own history and Shanghai's own shifting ground. And with such complexity and also criticality as exercised in Huyin's exhibition, we are also exhibiting another exhibition in our building, which is Shanghai Polemicist, which is looking at the history and the archive of the building through restaging of the Royal Asiatic Society Library. And also we really critically questioning knowledge production in a way in which how can we produce knowledge together collectively in the museum space. So we also launched this multi-year-long project called Auditorium, which is an experimental collective knowledge production space that with a stage is envisioned by artist Ming Wang. As everybody who are watching online, we hope that you'll be able to visit us, visit the exhibitions, visit Huyin's exhibitions in Shanghai. And also Adeena, we welcome you back to Shanghai anytime and the museum soon. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, Huyin. Thank you, Adeena. And I hope you have a really good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.